Tonight's homily is going to be the second in a two-part catechetical series on the natural law. Last week I spent some time talking about what makes us human. That is, those intrinsic elements of our nature that make us a distinctively human nature that we have. The first element was our capacity to reason, to judge in the broader Aristotelian sense, to recognize and pursue that which is good, true, and beautiful, and avoid that which is evil. Furthermore, among all the animals, we are the only ones who use reason to evaluate our actions and justify them, to defend what we intend to do or have done, to give reasons to show that our actions were moral or just. Other animals don't do this. Dogs don't explain why they just have to bite mailmen, nor do cats tell us why the birds they kill deserve death. The second element that makes us human is our freedom to choose, our free will. We are not slaves to our instincts or appetites, although in our worst moments we can allow them to enslave us. In our best moments, though, we use our freedom to choose among those things or actions we judge are good, those that will move us toward achieving a particular goal, end, or purpose, whether that be the ordinary mundane tasks of everyday life or the loftier tasks of fulfilling our God-given end as humans, to love and serve God and our neighbor here on earth, and be happy with Him and all the saints forever in heaven. Furthermore, with our God-given reason and free will, we can conceive of and create that which is good, true, and beautiful. Whether that be creating a beautiful piece of art, composing or performing a magnificent piece of music, building a useful machine or a building, providing for our families by working at our chosen profession, or by teaching our children what a life pleasing to God looks like, how they are to live a virtuous and grace-filled life that honors Him. Our magnificent parish was built by those who had such vision over 185 years ago. With eyes of faith, they saw what was transcendently good, true, and beautiful, and chose to expend a great deal of energy, money, prayers, and I am sure many, many tears to bring that vision to fruition. Why? To honor God and bless those of us who would come after them. That is how they used their freedom. Now, as I went over last time, St. Thomas Aquinas identified the first precept of natural law, or what he called the first principle of practical reason, as good is to be done and pursued, evil is to be avoided. This is not something we needed to be taught or had to figure out for ourselves. It's part of who we are. It's how God made us. It's part of our human nature. We're attracted to that which is good, and we avoid and loathe that which is evil. Of course, since sin entered the world, we're often mistaken. The good we're attracted to may not be truly good, but only apparently so. Or we may pursue something truly good in the wrong way. We may let our passions rule our reason rather than the other way around. Or we may have ignored our conscience for so long that we can no longer recognize what is good or evil in certain areas. But the fact remains that no one does evil for its own sake. No one chooses evil because it is evil. Rather, we see something good in what we choose, whether that is pleasure, power, or satisfaction, or the like. Even a kleptomaniac, someone who compulsively steals, doesn't do so for the sake of stealing itself, but for the pleasure, excitement, or brief peace that satisfying the compulsion brings. Now, pleasure, excitement, peace, and even material things in themselves are a good. That is what the kleptomaniac is choosing. The evil act of stealing is but the sinful means to obtain the good that is sought. Now, the precept, good is to be done and pursued and evil is to be avoided, sounds somewhat like a benevolent invitation, a gentle request, or a mild exhortation. But it's not. It's an imperative. It's a command built into us, indelibly stamped on our very nature. So much so that we will always maintain that what we do conforms to this ironclad rule, that what we do is just or justified. And even more so, we complain when we think someone else's behavior doesn't conform to this rule. C.S. Lewis, the most well-known Christian author in the 20th century, observes that young children and adults alike from all walks of life do this. They say things like, "How'd you like it if somebody did that to you?" Or, "That's my seat, I was there first." "Leave him alone, he isn't doing you any harm." Or, "Why should you shove in line in the front?" "Give me a bit of your orange, I gave you a bit of mine." "Come on, you promised." They all seem to be appealing to a standard or law we all know, one that is just, fair, and right, one that makes sense, one that is literally reasonable, a law that stands up to scrutiny via our reason. That we all do this without exception makes manifest our inherent moral sense. It reveals that we have an innate sense of right and wrong, that we all apply what is called the logic of morals. Consider the following situation that illustrates this all-pervasive moral sense or logic. Suppose you're on the top floor of a 10-story building. You walk into a room with two men in it just in time to see the first man hit the second man and knock him down. You ask him, "Why did you do that?" Which of the following would be a just reason for the first man hitting the second? Which would justify his action? If he told you, A, "I hit him to get the money out of his wallet," or B, "I hit him because it was the only way I could keep him from jumping out of the window." Clearly, B is a reasonable and just cause for hitting the man, while A just as clearly is not. Who would be justified in hitting someone to keep them from jumping out of a window in a tall building? It would be reasonable and just for anyone, anywhere, to do so if they ever found themselves in the same situation. Let's see how natural law, the law of human nature, ties into this situation. We're human because we have the capacity for reason and free will. The preservation of life is the good the first man recognized via his reason. And since he was able to act, natural law imposed on him the duty to use his free will to prevent the second man from jumping out of the window. This was the right thing to do for anyone who had the ability to do so. It would have been wrong for anyone in the room who could stop him not to try and stop him. And that is a key element of the logic of morals. They're not statements of personal preference. They're not contingent on time, place, or circumstances. The logic of morals speak with a universal voice about things that are right and wrong for all people who are similarly situated. They are commands. They apply and bind us every bit as much as the law of physics apply and bind matter in the material world. The obvious difference being, since we operate in the domain of freedom, we're free to ignore them, albeit at our peril. Now, there are many first or foundational principles of natural law that flow from our reason, free will, and the precept, do good and avoid evil. One of them is all men are created equal. Another is the only legitimate forms of government are those based on the consent of the governed. Tonight, however, let's delve into a particular first principle of natural law that can be applied to issues as important and grave as slavery, racism, and abortion. That principle is, we are not responsible for things we are powerless to affect. We are not responsible for things that we are powerless to affect. Like all principles of natural law, this is not contingent on time, place, or circumstances. It applies universally. No rational person could object to this principle. It's self-evident. I deserve no praise for the awe-inspiring beauty of Michelangelo's Pietà, nor any blame for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. In his book, First Things, Professor Hadley Arkus tells of a time when Abraham Lincoln applied this principle in reverse, if you will, to show why slavery is wrong. He imagines himself in a conversation with a white racist who is attempting to justify the enslavement of a black man. The racist chooses various real or imagined characteristics of the black man. Characteristics the black man is powerless to affect for his rational basis for slavery. What the racist finds, however, is that he himself is subject to enslavement on the very same basis. Lincoln writes, "You say A is white and B is black. It is color then, the lighter having the right to enslave the darker. Take care. By this rule, you are the slave to the first man you meet with fairer skin than your own." You don't mean color exactly? You mean the whites are intellectually superior to the blacks and therefore have the right to enslave them? Take care again. By this rule, you are to be the slave of the first man you meet with an intellect superior to your own. But, say you, it's a question of interest, and if you can make it your interest, you have the right to enslave another. Very well. And if he can make it his interest, he has the right to enslave you. This kind of reasoning is simple and easy to understand for anyone with the capacity for rational thought. We deserve no praise or blame, no reward or punishment for things we're powerless to affect. That is why slavery is wrong, why it is immoral, why it is a sin. It's wrong because it violates a principle that's necessarily true, a principle that holds for everyone, everywhere, in all circumstances. The Declaration of Independence itself, on which our country was founded, explicitly acknowledges natural law, principles that are necessarily true. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution do not just use the natural law, they presume it. But over the last 100 years or so, our courts and our culture have chosen to see moral issues through the lens of consequences that result from a particular policy or action rather than on natural law, on the outcome of the act rather than the act itself. Our courts and our culture have embraced consequentialism, a philosophy that inevitably leads to moral relativism. For example, rather than condemn racial discrimination using the same principle Lincoln used to condemn slavery, the Supreme Court in 1964, in a case involving a restaurant that excluded blacks from their main dining room, ruled that such racial discrimination was unconstitutional under, believe it or not, a clause in the Constitution that governed interstate commerce. Quoting a summary of the justice's reasoning provided by Professor Hadley Arcus, the court reasoned, if black people face the prospect of discrimination in public inns and restaurants, they might be discouraged from traveling among the states. If blacks were discouraged from traveling, the effect would be to reduce the total volume of trade available to restaurants, inns, and other places of public accommodations. This shortfall of trade would in turn reduce the orders these businesses would place with other businesses for meat, linens, or silverware. The effect would be to depress even further the level of trade and the general standard of living. The Supreme Court's ruling was purely speculative and hypothetical. And furthermore, and more importantly, the issue of racial discrimination was cast not as a moral issue, but an economic one. But if that were truly the case, all racists need do to satisfy the concerns of the court would be to travel and eat out more, thereby eliminating the economic impact of such discrimination. The blacks would still suffer unjust discrimination, and that evidently does not enter into the legal calculus of the Supreme Court. By traveling more and eating out more, the racists remove any grounds the Supreme Court had for forbidding racial discrimination. Such is the effect of shunning natural law. Nothing is inherently right or wrong. Nothing is categorically immoral. Sadly, this type of judicial reasoning is not the exception, it is the norm. In the recently celebrated Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade, for example, as welcome as that decision was, as much as we prayed for that outcome, let's consider the basis on which Roe versus Wade was overturned. Now, according to the American College of Pediatricians, the fact that human life begins at conception is uncontroversial among the scientific and philosophical community. So does that mean Roe versus Wade was overturned based on that fact, that being human, unborn children have the right to protection under the law? No. Well then, was it based on the natural law principle that we don't punish the innocent, that unborn children are not responsible for things they are powerless to affect? No. Both of these reasons would be an appeal to natural law, which our culture and our courts are loath to do. No, in Dobbs, the basis for overturning Roe versus Wade was, one, the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Two, abortion is not rooted in our history or tradition. And three, abortion is not sufficiently supported by other legal precedents. Brothers and sisters, even if the Constitution did confer a right to abortion, even if it was rooted in our history and tradition, and even if abortion was supported by hundreds or even thousands of legal precedents, it would still be immoral. It would still be an unspeakable evil. For the taking of the life of an innocent is forbidden by natural law. It applies to everyone, everywhere, in all circumstances, admitting of no exceptions. Furthermore, in returning the issue of abortion to the individual states to be allowed or forbidden by them, the court has, in effect, declared abortion not wrong. How? Because the first precept of natural law is good is to be done and pursued, and evil is to be avoided. This is a command, not a suggestion. No one, whether they are the highest court in the land or the lowest and most humble among us, has the right to do something that is wrong. Allowing abortion, therefore, is a tacit declaration that abortion is not wrong. Now, is this not the same situation our country found itself in our horrific struggle with the issue of slavery, with some states declaring themselves free states and others declaring themselves slave states? It's exactly the same situation. Let us then follow the example of Abraham Lincoln in reasoning about the morality of abortion. You say the unborn child is small, at its smallest but a single cell. It is size then, the larger having the right to kill the smaller. Take care. By this rule, you can be killed by the first person who is larger than you. You don't mean size exactly. You mean the unborn child is so weak and fragile that its life is dependent on someone else. Therefore, you have a right to kill the unborn child? Take care again. By this rule, you can rightly be killed by anyone who is stronger than you, or by the one on whom your life depends when your health becomes fragile. But, you say, it's a question of interest. The unborn child will interrupt your career or education. Therefore, you have a right to kill the unborn child. Very well. Then, if you are the cause of interrupting someone else's career or education through, say, an auto accident or any other reason that interferes with their interests, that person has a right to kill you. And so we find that, like slavery, any justification a person gives for killing the unborn can in turn be used to kill that person. Abortion is wrong for the same reason that slavery, racism, and racial discrimination are wrong. For the same reason euthanasia and all other sins against life are wrong. These and a host of other sins and evils that plague our culture can be recognized and remedied by governing our lives by that wisdom, that gift from God that is natural law. Recognizing and incorporating this gift of natural law into our legal system and lives is a necessary first step to redeeming our culture, to turning our hearts to He who made and loves us. It's also a necessary first step that will enable our culture, our country, and our world, through the grace our Lord gained for us by His sacrifice of love, to obey His most important of commandments, to love one another as I have loved you.